Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Thursday Garden Chat, the weekly public service broadcast from Garden Masterclass. Now, we are come more or less to the end of our live events for this year, apart from a couple which we're running in September. Now, yesterday we had the second of our events at the Surge Hill Plant Library, which is this really innovative set up by Tom Stewart Smith, which is almost like a private botanical garden. I mean, it's a really, really interesting enterprise and hugely encouraging. Anyway, we did a gig there. And we're going to
this is our second, yeah.
And we will be doing another one in September. So that's a wonderful opportunity to come to somewhere to learn about plants, specifically perennials, but also to mix with people who've got very innovative ways of looking at plants. And we've also, our other live event in September to maybe think about is the third one of our walks around White House Farm in Kent. Now, I've been very busy organizing or trying to organize our webinar program for September, October onwards. We've got a lot of dates in the diary, and some of you may have noticed them on our diary pages. We haven't actually opened up the ticket office yet. And when we do, there will be early bird bookings, an early bird rate for. And then we've certainly got some exciting stuff lined up. We also are running the naturalistic planting design course. And in collaboration with Britain's Landscape Institute, we are running an improved version of that wonderful tree course by
Henrik
Sjöman of SLU University in Sweden, which is just this most incredibly information-packed course on selecting trees, particularly from a climate change perspective. So anyway, do keep an eye on those diary pages. Now, if you are new to us, we are an organization that put on a huge amount of informative and inspirational material for people in the garden and landscape world. Sometime in the autumn, we are going to be going audio. We're going to be launching a whole series of podcasts because we know a lot of you don't really have much time to watch stuff, but spend a lot of time doing things when you can also listen to audio. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter on the website, or you can become a member. And if you become a member, that entitles you to various discounts, various special events, etc., and various recordings that are only available to members, and our archive. So I think over to you, Annie, to introduce tonight's guest.
Great, thank you, Noel. Thank you. Well, you'll notice the backdrop here is a bit different. I'm actually in the States, and it's actually lunchtime for me. It's not the evening. I'm at Chanticleer, one of the most beautiful gardens in America, without a doubt. It's an annual gig. I've been teaching here for 8 years, which I can't believe. And it's just such a joy to be here. That everything about it is lovely. I'm sure lots of you who are tuned in have been here, or it's on your list. It is very much like Great Dixter in spirit, in terms of the horticulture creativity, the people, but it's a much bigger footprint, and it's a much wealthier garden. Let's not mince our words, but it's just a beautiful place. So I'm very happy to be here. However, I've got no clothes because American Airlines decided that the whole of our plane would fly to America sans baggage. So I have been borrowing dresses and shirts. I had to go out and buy some underwear. You'll all be relieved to know. But that's life, isn't it? It's a first world problem, really. Anyway, so I could not attend tonight's or today's Thursday Garden Chat because this is a very special one to me. I'm sure many of you, if you scan your bookshelves, will see on the spine many books by Roger Phillips and Martyn. I treasure my books by Roger Phillips because there's so many reasons why they're so good, and we'll go through those. But they are absolutely some of my go-to books because they're so easy to use, good to use, informative, well set out, all of that. And when I lived in London up until about 22 years ago, I used to go to Eccleston Square, which is where Roger and Nicky lived, and for their open day, and marvel at the square and enjoy, I have to say, enjoy the cakes. I had to do that. But it was a joy to meet Roger, but also, you know, just one of those people in horticulture, so important. And I was having lunch here with somebody yesterday, and I said, oh, tomorrow we've got Nicky Foy as our guest, and Nicky was married to Roger Phillips. Does that name mean anything to you? And this chap, who is very high up in the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, said, yes, I've got all his books, of course I do. So globally, anyway, let me introduce Nicky Foy. Nicky was married to Roger for 50 years and is continuing Roger's wonderful work. So it's a pleasure to have you as a guest today. I want to say tonight, but it's tonight for you, this afternoon for me. So welcome, Nicky.
Thank you, Annie and Noel.
It's lovely to see you. So we will be showing some images, because we can't not show some of the beautiful images that you've shared with us. But we're going to start off with you to start with. So Nicky, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you met Roger, and let's set the scene of you and Roger's life together.
Well, I met Roger a very, very long time ago. I met him in 1968 when he had just set up a photographic studio, having been in advertising.
Mm-hmm.
Decided to set up as a freelance photographer. And the person who was supposed to be sort of helping him, his sort of office manager, had let him down, and he knew somebody that knew my mother, who said, oh, there's this young woman, so a young girl, this young woman who might be able to help you out for a few weeks till you find somebody. And that's what happened. So I helped Roger right at the very, very beginning. And then we hit it off, and our life then began. He carried on doing his photographic studio, specializing food cookery and book covers. I, meanwhile, went to university and I did literature, and then when I finished a master's, and I then did a teaching degree, and so I started to be a teacher. But all along I was helping him. So by this time, not quite, no, I was going to say, so it was a little bit later when he started concentrating on books solely, and then I started editing with him and started doing some research, and I did 2 texts with him where I was doing the research and the writing. That was his book on herbs, and a book, The Photographic Garden History, which came a bit later. But all along we were always working sort of hand in glove, because I had the knowledge of how to write and punctuate a sentence, and Roger had the knowledge of being really having all the brilliant ideas, but just kind of throwing them down on the bit of paper without structuring them. So it was a good combination.
Yeah, and Roger was an artist as well, wasn't it? I mean, he studied art, didn't he?
That's what he had done originally. So he'd gone into advertising because he'd been at art school, and then he became very interested in graphics and stuff. So he, you know, we're talking now mid 1950s, advertising was becoming a big thing. He became an art director in advertising, worked on lots of very famous campaigns, like the story of you know who, which was Schweppes. Drink a pint of milk a day, which was it was on that. And what was another one that he did? Anyway, he go to work on an egg.
Oh, right.
I remember that in my childhood. Gosh,
I know. Some of those are so familiar.
Yes, and there were those catchphrases you'd endlessly repeat at school, like "nice one, Cyril."
So he was really there in advertising in that sort of heyday.
Yeah.
But what happened was he kind of got interested in photography. He was often doing photographs for campaigns they were pitching for, because he worked for Ogilvy and Mather. They had a big photographic studio in their building. He would go down to the photograph, he'd take the pictures to present to the client to see whether they could win the account. And eventually he thought, well, in fact, he met Bert Stern, and Bert Stern said, he gave Bert Stern this picture, and he said, well, look, this is what sort of we want to do. You know, can you sort of do something with this? And he said, well, who did that picture? I said, well, I did. And he said, well, what's wrong with it? You could use that picture. So Roger thought, maybe I could become a photographer. So that's what sort of encouraged him to sort of stop that and go on to the photography, because he always liked moving on, Roger. He was moving on and moving on.
So how did he? Where did his passion for plants and fungi and wildflowers and trees? How did that sort of meld into? How did that happen?
Well, so what happened was he talks about it a little bit in Wildflowers, actually, in the introduction to Wildflowers. But we used to take his son out to the we used to take his son out to the canal at Denham, and then they would say, oh, what's this flower, Daddy? And he was saying, I don't know what this flower is. And then he thought, oh, well, I want to find out. And then typically Roger, well, if I want to find out, I'll do a book about it.
Why not?
Yeah, why not? So then, and because he had these connections in publishing, because he did a lot of book covers, he went to one of those connections, and in fact, who worked for Pan originally, and said, look, who might like this book? Can you give me some leads? And he said, I like it. I'm going to do it. And that's where it all began. So that's how he did the Wildflowers book and the Trees book. Those were both books on his own. Those were very, very successful. So then they started saying, well, what do you want to, let's think of some other successful things to do. That's what Pan's idea was. And by this time he had met Martyn Ricks. So they started doing a whole garden plant series.
I think perhaps we should you should now explain who Martyn Ricks is and how they met. And that
right. Well, Martyn Ricks is Dr. Martyn Ricks is a very brilliant botanist, and now writes for the Dendrology magazine. So he's very eminent in the field. And Roger first met him 45 years ago at Wisley, where Martyn was working. That was kind of Martyn's first job. Well, maybe not first job, but he was when he came out of university. And so he was advising and helping Roger a little bit on the tree book, which was, he didn't work directly on it, but so that's how they met and they knew each other. And then when they wanted this idea of doing these garden plant books, Roger said to Martyn, would you like to work with me? Because Martyn was the brilliant academic, and the botanist. So he brought all that to the table. And Roger was the visual person, the photographer, the layout person, and he brought all that to the table. Interestingly, over the years, they both learnt from each other a great deal, because Roger became very knowledgeable about botany himself in the end, and Martyn actually is a very good photographer too and can take pictures. So yeah, that's how they met, and that's probably in about 1978, something like that.
Because what's special about certainly some of these books is the number of photographs of plants in the wild. Ancestors of garden plants in the wild, which are images which are actually pretty hard to come by. And I assume a lot of that was Martyn on botanical travels all over.
Yes, and Roger too. I mean, they went to China several times together, and whenever Roger saw things, they took pictures and they took pictures and they took pictures. And the archive is absolutely enormous. And so he was forever being able to draw on his own archive. But Martyn too had a very good archive, and they knew all other botanists who were traveling all over the world, so they could often buy stuff in from them.
Right. Yes.
I think also on that point, for me, as somebody who teaches garden design and planting design, actually, Roger and Martyn's books together are so useful, because the first thing you say to students is find out where plants come from. And I don't mean B&Q or Yvale or wherever, where do they actually come from? So these images show the plants in their natural habitat, and you get an immediate idea about where the plants are from and what they're going to need, but also the quality of the photographs, because often books will have a picture of a plant and it's the size of a postage stamp, and an outline of a plant, and you won't see the plant in its entirety, and they're so useful for that point of view. Absolutely brilliant. So
I think that's where that was such a good combination between him and Martyn, because Roger really did have the artistic knowledge, the layout, the photographic knowledge, And Martyn, as I say, had the botanical knowledge. So the two together, that was a winning combination, really.
Yeah, and I think the other key thing that these books are really, really excellent is they're set in chronological flowering order. So the shrubs book, which I think hasn't really, I think it's one of the top books on shrubs that should be in everybody's library, because it's set in chronological flowering order. So if you're trying to identify something that's flowering in May or whatever, you can, you know. Also, the images are large and you can see very clearly. It's such a simple but really, really useful technique.
Yes, and the 2-volume perennials one as well, which again works chronologically. I think was perhaps difficult with some of the other books, but I mean that chronological order is one that is something very intuitive and user friendly, and does get the tyranny of A to Z. And when you're starting out with plants, A to Z can be very confusing because it's kind of random, really.
Exactly.
Well, that's what Roger always said. He did the book that he wanted. In other words, he knew nothing, so I know nothing. So how would I go about trying to find out something? I picked this plant. Well, if I know, and I know it's June, I'm going to go and look for something that tells me what I might find in June, rather than tells me, oh, has it got a sepal and has it got
And one of the things that's so distinctive about these books is, of course, those images where you've got all the cut flowers or whatever on the page together. And I imagine that must have been very, very challenging to achieve sometimes. And I kind of just imagine there must have been times when something was just about to go off and drop its petals, and something else was just not quite opening. It must have been real, cliffhanger stuff some of the time, mustn't it?
Well, particularly as the year that he did the Wildflowers book was that incredibly hot summer of whenever it was in the 70s. He would have to go off at 5 in the morning, and he'd take cool boxes with this, that funny kind of plant foamy stuff, and he would stick them in the boxes in that plant foam, and he'd drive down to Wales and he'd get what he could while it was fun. And then he'd drive back to London as quickly as he can to photograph it, because, as you say, everything wilted. It was very, very challenging, and people did say to him afterwards, I don't know how you managed to do that.
Oh, brilliant. And how many books in total did Roger write?
That's quite hard to about, but it's about, he always used to say it was about 50. And I probably was. I mean, I tried. You can see there's the picture up on the screen.
Yeah, that's very timely. Yeah,
that's most of the foreign editions, and then some of the other ones that were shown just a bit earlier were the books on his bookshelves. But what you didn't see in any of the pictures I sent you, there's loads and loads of small books as well. So the whole series of small books that were done, which if you include all of those, it's definitely 50 plus books. Yeah.
Goodness gracious. And so when did you decide to sort of carry on and republish, and how did all of that come about? What was your incentive there?
Well, Roger did a book called The Worldwide Forager, which he did with a publishing company called Unbound, because this was about 8-10 years ago, because Macmillan said, oh no, we're not sure that we can make that work. So you have to raise the money yourself, which we did, and that was published successfully. Then, the head of Pan Macmillan, who had been away or ill or something when this transaction had originally gone on, was incredibly upset about it and saying, why was that book done with, why aren't you doing books with us? And he said, well, they didn't seem interested. So I said, yes, we are interested. Yes, we are. I want to do 2 new editions of your first 2 books, which was Wildflowers and Trees. So that is what's happened. So about 5 years ago, I suppose it must have been, they did a deal. And Roger started working away at it immediately, aged 85 plus, which is pretty amazing, really, that somebody that age is kind of doing new books. So he was working away on those, and he actually had really completed the Wildflowers book, but there was a lot of logistics that had to be tidied up. So I had to do that first of all, and that's come out this year. But the Trees book, which had been started and all the kind of basics had been laid down, but wasn't completed. So that I'm working on now with other people and with help.
Right.
And that will come out next year.
Fantastic.
The interest in foraging, where did that come from? Well, I imagine it's possibly growing out of the food photography, but
yes,
Roger was quite ahead of his time, really, there, wasn't he?
Very much so. I mean, he had always been interested in food. He had, as a young man, he'd gone to Spain a number of times. He adored cooking paella, and he loved open fire cooking and things like that. And he, in the war, he had been sent to his grandparents' house, which is just on the outskirts of London, and they were farmers. And so he had got used to, you know, being out and about, knew about sort of basic edible things, including lots and lots of mushrooms, which grew in the fields. And the local postman, when he delivered the letters, used to pay Roger for however many punnets of mushrooms Roger could give him. So he was making money as a boy of about 10 by selling mushrooms.
Yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant.
And then it carried on. I don't know. I don't know whether there was. I think he was trying to think of what would. So, you know, it was a brilliant combination of his botany interests, his cooking interests, and just he loved adventuring around. So, you know, wandering around, finding things that really excited him. And that really took off because it was just him and Richard Mabey in the early days were sort of contemporaneous with their work. Off it went with that one.
Yeah, and there was a picture that just flashed by a little while ago with Roger standing with some of his paintings. So he studied art. Where did he study? Where did he
well, that was an interesting story too, because when he was 18, there was still conscription, whatever that was, in about 1950.
Right.
So he was conscripted into the Air Force, and he went to Canada for a year. And then he decided that he didn't want to be, he wasn't prepared to be killing people. So he went to his commanding officer and said, I don't want to do this. I want to come out as a pacifist. And the man said, oh my God, this is going to cause me so much paperwork. Anyway, so Roger came back to London, and then he had to have a sort of trial with some Anthony Slesher or somebody quite famous of the time. But Roger had a very famous uncle who was called Lord Francis Williams, who was a very big guy in the Labour Party and the publishing world. And one way and another, the court case went well, and they let Roger out of the army again. And then he went and worked for the medical corps. While he'd been in Canada and hating being in the Air Force, he had taken up art classes. And when he came back to England, he decided that he was going to go to art school. So he went to Chelsea School of Art, and they said, oh, you're not bad, so we're going to put you in the second year.
Oh.
He went into the second year. He sort of skipped the first year. They reckoned he'd done enough of that. So he did the second and third year, and he wrote his dissertation. This is a lovely story. He wrote his dissertation on German Expressionism.
Oh, wow.
And when he submitted it, they said, oh, no, this isn't acceptable. This isn't proper art. No, we're not going to give you your degree or your qualification.
Wow.
So he didn't actually technically get his qualification.
Good Lord.
But by that time, he was doing lots of graphics work he loved jazz, and he was always putting on jazz evenings, and he did all the graphics and the posters for it and everything. Anyway, you know, jobs were easy in those days. He got a job at an advertising agency, a sort of smaller one, and then a bigger one, and, you know, and he did very, very well because, and so he sort of stopped painting, but he always drew. He was, all his life he drew. But I always felt that he was not going to really be a painter insofar as it's a lonely thing, and he was far too people orientated.
Yeah.
So it didn't surprise me. But when he was about I suppose very late 70s to 80s, when the books he'd done 50 books, and he kind of, in a way, not got bored with it, but, you know, it wasn't easy to get contracts and stuff anymore. He decided to go back to painting, and we knew some young people who were involved in this place called the Tannery Arts in Bermondsey, and he got a space. Well, I came home one day and found that he was oil painting in the sort of best room of the house, all over the carpet. And I said, enough. You know, drawing was okay, but and crayons was okay. Oil painting was not okay. That enough is enough. You've got to, if you're going to do this, you've got to get somewhere to do it. Yeah. So through a young friend, he found this place, and it was very social for a while. It was in a factory just off Bermondsey Street, and there were lots of young students, lots of artists there, and he enjoyed them. He shared a studio with a couple of them, and he loved Bermondsey Street, which was just becoming very hip. And there's a restaurant there called Jose Jose something. He's become a very well-known chef. And Roger, he was Spanish. Roger loved anything and everything Spanish. So he'd go there for lunch quite often. And yeah, he absolutely adored it. But then, and he worked on lots of interesting projects, his own art projects. But then they moved it off to Camberwell, and he didn't like it down there very much. So and then he went back to the books. So it was always kind of, you know.
So did he ever exhibit his artwork?
He did two things. He did a thing at the Cockpit with at the Cockpit Theatre. He did a one-night thing, and you know, loads of friends and everything came. But so that was fun, but it wasn't publicised enough. And he did exhibit some stuff in the garden, but Roger just was about doing things. He wasn't really about selling things.
Yeah.
So if he were, you know, so it was either I was going to have to do it, and I was busy too.
Yes.
Or just move on to the next thing. He was always all about the doing, not about the flogging it.
Yeah, because you were teaching. You were a teacher.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, you know, I had some time, but we had two children and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. There wasn't enough time in the day to do all the things.
All of that. Oh, gosh, yeah. And you live in Eccleston Square, which for those people who are tuning in from far away is in the centre of London near Victoria. It's a very handsome square with a very big, beautiful, you know, locked square in the middle. But did Roger have, I mean, I know, you know, well, I think he had influence and on what was going on in the square in terms of gardening and bringing plants and all that. What was his involvement with the planting there?
Well, what happened was we had lived there for a few years, and then a young man who wanted to make his name in the political world. It used to be the idea, oh, you set up residents associations or you set up garden committees. That was your way to get onto the local council. So he lived in the square and he set these two things up. And he was in a house, it was in one of the houses that we lived in, and he knew that Roger had done all these books. So he said, oh, well, why didn't you ask this man to help with the garden? So they said to Roger, will you be the honorary garden manager? So he said, yeah, because I mean, in a way, it was like a wonderful playground for him, this huge garden. And basically he was given carte blanche to do what he wanted. So he went about making mulching it, making he called it an urban desert when it began, and it was. But he got the soil good, and he started planting all sorts of interesting things. And then we had the great storm of 1987. Everything fell down. We lost 17 plane trees.
Wow!
17 plane trees.
Yeah.
And everything was smashed to bits. Unfortunately, I didn't put a picture of that in there. And everybody's going around and say, oh, poor Roger. Oh, I'm so sorry for Roger. You know, he's worked so hard on the garden. He's going to be so upset. And Roger was rubbing his hands with delight because now he could plant all sorts of sun-loving things because it was so shady before. So he was actually now that's that picture that's up there now. That's the garden literally this week.
Wow.
See how much it's grown again, because there was an earlier picture which was much barer. Which was taken in about 3 years after the storm. So it had been replanted, but everything was at a low level. That was what he loved. It's beautiful now, but it is getting too shady again.
Yes.
The inevitable cycle, isn't it? People get attached to that stage of the cycle, and it takes something like a storm to actually break through that and start. It's like succession in ecology. It's a sort of endless process.
And you can never get permission in somewhere like, because the square's it's, you know, it's got a preservation order on it. It's, you know, it's part of these cubit buildings and stuff. So he could never, for instance, change the shape of the square. The shape had been dictated by this man Thomas Cubitt, who laid out and built the square. So nothing could be changed in that way. Overall out. But what he did a clever thing. There were all these sort of big flower beds, and then he put paths through the flower beds. So he didn't change the flower beds, he didn't change the shape of them, but he put paths through them. So that enabled him to do lots more interesting things with the planting. So yeah, he really was fantastic. You know, he just loved to do new and different things. So that storm was actually, it was really what set the garden on its path.
Yes.
The
Yeah,
two things I remember about Eccleston Square, I mean, apart from being wonderful and all these interesting shrubs, and of course the cakes, we've mentioned the cakes on the open day, is the tennis court fences were all covered with climbing roses, and that just seemed like such a
wow. Wow.
sensible thing, or
Yes.
probably ramblers actually, but the tennis courts absolutely clothed in roses. And I remember that behind the scenes, the composting area was fantastic. And as you were saying, Nicky, you know, that this, he did so much for the soil, but you know, it was like this gold dust, this beautiful, rich compost, which was mulched everywhere. So those are the sort of two things that stick in my mind from how wonderful the square was.
Yeah, well, he got very excited about his mulching and stuff, and he's got the big mulching machine and all this. So, but the soil is good now, and we've got excellent gardeners. Yeah.
I think perhaps we should say a little bit about what makes these London squares special for those who are outside Britain, because they're not public spaces, are they?
No, that's the point. The houses that are built around them have automatic access, because those houses, for the most part, have no gardens at all themselves. They sometimes have a little bit of a yard at the back, but they have no garden space. So the garden, all that space is taken and, as it were, put into the middle. Got a fencing around it, and then only the people who live round and about in general can have access to those squares. In the past, after the war, a lot of the gardens, the railings were taken down for ammunitions. And then after the war, they couldn't afford to put them back up, couldn't afford to revive the gardens. And sometimes the council took those gardens over, and they are now open gardens. But for the majority of them, people have got them back to how they had been, or that they're a private garden for the local residents. And they've often got tennis courts in. We have sort of play areas for the children. Most of them have a little play area for the children, and then other things. I mean, in our garden, we do allow people to have sort of barbecues and parties and things. A lot of the garden squares don't allow that, but we try to make it as good for everybody as we possibly can.
And all the tenants pay a service fee, I guess.
They all have to pay, that's right. To get a key to it, they have to pay a certain amount per annum.
Sure, yeah.
And we do have a few people from outside can apply to come in, but the waiting list is 17 years.
Wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Of course, did Roger also help with other London squares? I mean, London squares are such an institution in the city and face all sorts of pressures.
Yes.
And I understand he was involved in helping residents of other squares.
Yeah, well, he said he had a phase, I think it was in probably the late 80s, where he set up a thing, and it was called the Society for the Preservation of London Squares, and lots of people would ring him up and ask him advice about how legal advice about how to fight off various developers and things. And there were people who would sort of he advised people about how to tackle those issues, because there were legal obligations on gardens. They weren't really allowed to take them over, but people were being, if there weren't enough residents around, they were just being kind of opportunistic, particularly like hotels and things. So he helped a lot of those people. And that's that picture there. Sorry, that's the one from 1997. No, 1990 about. That's after the thing. I mean, it's just, I can't believe it when I look at it, because it's so empty compared with that picture we looked at just now.
Absolutely.
Which is so recent,
Quite a few of the pictures you sent in were with camellias. I think about these squares, they're a very, very nice climate, aren't they? London is a very sheltered climate.
Yeah, Roger always said it was a microclimate. I mean, we've actually officially got a national ceanothus collection.
Oh, really?
But actually, the gardener is now talking about applying for a national rose collection and a national camellia collection, because we've got so many fantastic examples of both those plants as well.
Wow.
And that's why I keep showing the camellias, because I just so love them, the red things together, they're so beautiful. And I just happen to have a lot of those pictures. But the rambling roses, I mean, he absolutely adored them. They're all over the place in the garden. I mean, they literally bring down trees sometimes, and then, you have to cut the tree down, cut the rose right back, build a great big cage. This is what the gardener's done. And then blown me down. Within about 2 years, it's starting to sprout out of the cage again. I mean,
Yeah,
they're extraordinary, some of these things.
yes, yeah, absolutely. So, and Roger got involved with some television programs as well, didn't he? So, tell us about the series. Well, he's done a couple of series.
Yeah,
on
he's
TV.
done 2 series, and in my head, I've always been muddled up about which one came first, but I just checked. I looked them up and checked it. So the first one actually was the one that he did with Martyn, and it was called The Quest for the Rose, and that was in 1994. It was a 6-part series, and it shows Martyn and Roger running all around the world, south of France, Turkey, China, you know, hunting for the origins of the rose and this and that. And there was a lovely book that came out with that one, and that went down very well. And then ITV got wind of it or something, I suppose, and then they said, well, let's do this one based on your book, The 3,000 Mile Garden. So when we had constantly gone to America to collect and take mushroom photographs, we'd met this woman called Leslie Land, who was a food writer for the New York Times or something. And she and Roger hit it off well because they both liked gardens and food and stuff. And they wrote to each other about their gardens. And she had a little bit of garden in Maine, which was very wild, and she was doing something great things with it. And then, of course, Roger was organising Eccleston Square Garden. So they wrote these letters and then these programmes. And funnily enough, if you go on YouTube, I just did it earlier today. There is a bit of that available. If you put in, you know, the 3,000 Mile Garden ITV, there's a link onto YouTube that shows a bit of it.
Yeah.
Quite a bit of it. It's really good fun. I mean, the quality of the filming isn't terribly good, being 30 years.
Yeah.
But that was really good fun to do. Everybody got involved with that in the square. They all liked. Roger was a great one for getting everybody doing bits and pieces. We did filming of the garden open day with the cakes. But the bit that everybody thought was absolutely hilarious, which was that he decided that he had read somewhere that you could cook ham, or you could cook in a compost heap. So he bought this enormous ham and cooked it in the compost heap at Eccleston.
Fantastic.
And then he got, you know, we were filmed, you know, getting it out and making all the family. The children were slightly kind of like this, eating something a bit of the compost heap, but it was wrapped up.
Yeah.
We all ate. It was very delicious. It was very
fantastic.
loved stuff like that. He thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, I do remember that series. I thought it was really gentle and really lovely. A sort of, you know, this going backwards and forwards from Maine to England, and you know, it had a lovely sort of way about it, and it was delightful. And was there a book as well to accompany that series?
Yes, because in fact the book had come out first.
Oh, right, okay.
The little book of letters between the two of them was called 3,000 Mile Garden. That had been published already, and somebody picked up on that and thought, oh, that would be fun. And that was really quite original to sort of like a program about 2 sets of letters. But and
two very different climates. Sorry,
And I was just going to say, those were the days when they were prepared to pay for travel.
Yes.
Those are the days. The trouble is, when you live in a golden age, you never realise you're in it, do you? just thinking back to my sort of early writing career, so 1990s till about early 2000s, I suppose, you know, British publishers were churning out these really good books, gardening, cookery, lifestyle stuff. You know, Colour Repro had really hit a high. The editorial was good, fantastic production, and of course we had the huge advantage that, you know, we would sell straight into North America. Everyone would recover their costs, then go into translation, and British consumer publishing was just there, and you know, we were earning all this money, and you know,
and it was all before you know what.
Yes, exactly.
So this is the big problem. I mean, you know, you go on, you know, if you want to identify a plant, you point your phone at it and it identifies it for you.
Yes. Well, I that moth that I showed you earlier. That moth that I showed you earlier on, that was about 6 inches across, I took a photo of it. I didn't even ask my phone to identify it, and Apple, you know, cameras identified it as an imperial moth, and you know, it's extraordinary. I didn't even ask it to. So Roger received an MBE. What year was that?
Oh, I had to look that up because I was so worried you asked me that question. It was in 2010.
2010.
And it was, that was great because it was somebody who lived in the square, actually. funny enough, who'd also lived at the top of the house, so had a wonderful view of the garden all the time. And she herself had been, she had an OB and then a CB. She's now a dame, and she was a great fan of Roger's, and she knew how much he had worked for the community. And I think people were encouraged to put forward people who had worked in communities and things. So she put his name forward for that. And so that's how that happened. Yeah, that was a very exciting day. I blush in embarrassment now, remembering how filthy the car was that we drove into Buckingham Palace with. But we were all smart, so it didn't, once we got out of the car, we got. But when I think about it, the car was filthy, and we didn't sort of think, oh, we must polish up the car. We're going to the.
Well, you should do. Let them see how the other half live. Yes.
Well, you never know.
Yeah,
they might have cleaned it for you while you were getting the medal, and that, you know.
It was a junky old Toyota in amongst all the smart, you know, BMWs and stuff. But it was a rather. Was it important to Roger? Was it to that recognition? Was it just a nice fun thing, or do you think it really meant a lot to him? I think it was more of a fun thing, because he had already met, now King Charles, but the Queen and Prince Charles. He had already met them because, and this is a lovely story, he knew somebody who was a great shooting friend of Prince Charles up in Balmoral. And apparently this man and Prince Charles were in the car together, and this guy had a copy of Roger's Mushrooms book in the side pocket. And Prince Charles said to him, oh, you've got that mushroom book. Do you? Yeah. He went, yeah, that was my friend Roger Phillips did that. He said, oh, you know that man. Do you think he'd like to come up to Balmoral and help me identify the mushrooms on the estate?
Fantastic.
So Roger was invited. Off he went. You know, great problems trying to think what
it's a dangerous commission, I would have thought. Identifying mushrooms can have some.
Well, I mean, I can tell you with the royal family, nothing.
Possibly regicidal consequences.
Yeah, but nothing is a commission. You're not paid. You have to pay for it yourself. Anyway, when he got up there, they had a nice morning walking around, looking at all these various mushrooms and things and chatting about it. And then it was lunchtime, and Prince Charles said, oh, you know, would you like to stay and have a spot of lunch with us? With us was his mother and the Queen Mother.
Oh my goodness.
They've got a little sort of, you know, like a chalet, a little dasher, you know, in somewhere on the land of Balmoral. And he said it was so amazing because they were so charming and they were so informal, you know. The Queen Mother was kind of like serving him some chicken, and it was salad from her garden. Oh, nice. It was also sloe gin she'd made, and it was
famous for her gin, wasn't she? Yes.
He came back. I mean, 6 hours later, he was still utterly plastered, but he kept together while he was there. Yes. But when he came home, and it sort of suddenly hit him. So that, I don't know whether, I don't think that the Queen must have met thousands of people all the time. So I don't think she recognised him. But she's got a man at her ear all the time, and who's obviously sort of whispering things in her ear, reminding her of things, because she said something along the lines of, you know, oh, you know, congratulations on your marvellous books, Mr. Phillips, or something. So, you know, people have researched and they're trying to find things to do. But that was a thing.
How wonderful. What great stories. I mean,
And looking through these pictures you've sent in, I'm very, very surprised. I never met Roger because, you know, I used to have a nursery and I used to sell at RHS Vincent Square shows, sort of late 80s, early 90s. And, you know, you'd really get to know people. Regulars would come in, and you know, our paths never crossed, which was a shame. But I love his dress sense. I mean, those clothes, it's just fantastic.
So distinctive.
I would press that. No, he liked to be wacky, and I liked making him look wacky. So between us, we always enjoyed that. We always he always had sort of funny, eccentric things.
He didn't need any encouragement, is what you're saying.
No, he didn't need any encouragement to sort of do bonkers things. He always enjoyed a laugh and being kind of eccentric about things. Absolutely wonderful.
But it's so wonderful that you are, you know, continuing this and keeping it alive. And I mean, you know, will the publishers, do you think they will republish some of the older books anyway, or do people have to look on remaindered book sites to get, let's say, the Shrubs book or the Roses book, which is another great one?
Well, I think the big issue with publishing here is that there's sort of before digitized publishing and after digital publishing.
Right.
So anything that was done before, like Wildflowers, like Trees, that's a huge operation to then scan and digitize everything. And then things later, post-digitization, then those are easier to do. So, for instance, the volume of mushrooms, the second volume of mushrooms was, everything had to be digitized, which was done. So that now exists in digital format. So if they wanted to do another version of that, that would not be that hard.
Right.
All the early stuff was not. So it has been very, very trying, to say the least. It's cost a lot from everybody's point of view.
Oh, right. So to digitalize it, are they taking digital images of the existing images or reshooting completely?
Well, that's you've got to the nub of the difficulty that we've had there. So no, Roger was hoping to do it by just photographing the original images.
Yeah.
But actually what we've done is gone back to the original transparencies.
Right.
And they have come up amazingly well.
Right.
But it's a long, hard process for the people for the people doing the scanning and everything.
Yes.
So that's why it's expensive.
Yes.
Nobody wants things to be expensive.
Yeah.
So I think that it's also quite exhausting doing this. I don't think I think these two will be the two main things.
Right.
But he did write a memoirs that he was very keen for me to get out. So I'm going to be working on that after all this.
Wow. Oh, that would be exciting.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it would be fascinating, I should think.
Yeah. He had basically written that. And I had already started sort of editing it, but I was always having to ask him lots of questions. So, of course, he's not going to be there to answer those questions. But I do, I know quite a lot of people. Quite a lot of people that he knew from art school, for instance, are still alive. There was an earlier picture where he's sitting in the garden next to a man, and then there's a woman next to them in the background. And the man that he's sitting next to is a film man called Philip Harrison that he was at Chelsea with in the 50s. And Harrison is still around. And will know stuff about Roger from way back in the day. So I'm gonna have to sort of make sure to interview some of these people, but he's done a lot of work on it himself, and there's going to be lots of nice images to go with it, obviously.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to put a plug in for the updated Shrubs book.
I told my editor lady that, and
I can get a petition together if you like. No, but I mean, honestly, it really is. But I mean, it still looks so fresh. But it would be great to have an updated version of that. It's such a fantastic book. And so useful.
I will also discuss with Martyn, see what he's got to say about it. Martyn worked on that. Can I talk for a second about mushrooms? Because I got a couple of stories about that.
Do absolutely, please do.
Because we saw a couple of pictures. I saw you've got a couple of pictures you put up where. So in more recent times, he kind of became like a sort of the old guru of mushrooms and foraging and cooking and all this. And he's very friendly with some people who ran a thing called the Good Life Festival. And they have this wood down in Wales. And so we would go there, and he would lead people in the woods, collecting all the mushrooms, and then they would all come back, and then he would help identify them all, and we'd get all the edible ones, and then he'd make sort of flamboyant things of those ones. And he loved doing that, and that was great fun, and that's where he got his sort of young following that he's got now. So they really, really think of him in terms of mushrooms. And it was only 3 years ago or something, we went to the New Forest, because that's a great, well, I better not say that very sotto voce, great place for mushrooms. And of course, back in the day, they didn't mind you doing it. Now they don't really like you doing it. Anyway, Roger and I were looking out, we wanted to try and photograph something. And all of a sudden, there was this sort of little group of people, and voices shouted from across the forest, "It's Roger Phillips."
the
stamping
stamping.
over. There were some young people we had met before, and they'd found a very rare thing, lion's mane it's called, and they hadn't touched it, but they said, oh, Roger was very excited, so they said, well, let's have a look at it. So we all went and had a look at it, and yeah, so you know, that's been exciting. But there was a lovely story he told once when he was giving a lecture about mushrooms, and he was showing these various kind of groups of mushrooms, and it was a sort of proper lecture. And he had his, you know, he had his screen up behind him and his counter in front of him. And so he was talking about it, and he'd mentioned about the psilocybins, which are the magic mushrooms. And he said at one point he had to turn around to do something over here. And then when he turned back, all the psilocybins had disappeared. The students obviously jumped up from the front and grabbed them, and all looking around very
fantastic.
So that was one of his favorite stories.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant. Oh gosh. Oh no, it's just been, I'm so pleased that we tracked you down, Nick. It's been lovely
Nice, really
talking
nice.
to you and keeping Roger's memory alive, and yeah, and just being able to sort of celebrate these wonderful books, and what a life. But what's your sort of timeline on the memoir? Have you got an idea in your head, or is it just like, well, you'll start and when you finish, you finish? Or
well, I mean, Roger would literally be turning in his grave if he knew I had done nothing on it, because he didn't realize how much needed to be done on the other two.
yes,
and they
yes.
had to come first, and they, you know, it's a process, you know, etc., etc. So you know, so if it's coming out next year, it should be finished, you know, from my point of view, hopefully by about November of this year.
Yeah.
Then I will take a little breather, and then I'll start on that early next year.
Yeah,
because it's going to be much easier to do, because it's basically it's text and pictures, and it's just me and my computer and the text. This has been so complicated because, you know, finish the question you asked before. I mean, some of it's been, you know, old pictures have been scanned. Some of it's been some new pictures taken, because we're going to have new trees in there. And there's been extra things, and one thing and another. So it's been a really big logistical puzzle to resolve. So I definitely need a little rest after this, but then I'm going to get going.
But obviously you enjoy it. I mean, you know, you enjoy it. I mean, it must be lovely to be carrying on this wonderful work.
Yes, it is. And people are very, you know, they're very kind about it, and they've you know, I get invited to this amazing place, Hex in Belgium each year. These people who've got this wonderful garden and have known Roger. The mother was a Rosarian, knew Roger, met Roger a number of times, and Roger went there lots and lots of times. And they invite me each year, you know, whenever I've got anything I want to do. And they did this with Roger before, but they had me over for when the vegetables book came out, and they do a little presentation and make a big fuss. And I went over for Wildflowers. That picture of me holding the book that you showed a bit earlier on, that was me there, you know, when they're just that's very, very nice. And that's how, you know, you meet some of the foreigner, and they keep coming back and saying, why isn't it translated? Because his early books were translated into Dutch.
Right.
But they just they won't pay for these things. That's what I mean about there's just not the money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we've had some nice comments coming in. Rachel Parrish is saying, I'll definitely buy the memoir. You know, you've got one sale there. And it was so fascinating to find out about the person behind the name. I had no idea what a wonderfully colourful character he must have been. And Susan Ryan saying, thank you very much. Fun and interesting talk. Joe saying, fascinating. I have several of the books. Looking forward to the memoir with great anticipation. Oh dear, the pressure's on, Nicky. Thank you.
Please buy the other two books first while you're waiting.
And what I want, my last question is, anyone in the family taking up the reins and carrying on this kind of work, or?
Well, not directly, but interestingly, they are all much more interested in plants than they were. And it is that funny thing. I mean, I'm much more interested in plants than I was, because when you've got an expert, you tend to think, oh, well, they know it all. So you always ask them, and, you know, but when they're not there, you have to start trying to sort of work it out yourself. So yes, I mean, you know, all three of his children are kind of getting interested and, you know, taking some interest, but particularly in the mushrooms, and but also in the forage plants, and they know a few key things. Oh yeah, we're going to go for that. We're going to make nettle soup, and And we had a fun, interesting. So years ago, here at this cottage where we are, there's a bit of land, and Roger planted an edible fence. He called it, and that included lots and lots of, berries and hazelnut trees. And that was about 25 years ago. So a friend of mine who's a truffle hunter with dogs, she came last year with her dog, and the dog was going absolutely berserk under these trees and finding truffles.
Wow, fantastic. Fantastic.
So yet another edible thing to make. We use them. They were delicious. So yeah, he planted an orchard here.
Yeah.
So we make apple juice from that every year, and we've got certain things that we do, and we all sort of look after that and keep it going for him.
Oh, lovely. Oh, well, I know that your daughter and son-in-law have been very helpful setting you up tonight with the AV and everything. So thank you to them.
All worked very well. Yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah. It's been such a joy to have you on, Nicky. Thank you so much for getting the photos ready, as I know you're very busy, but it's been lovely to remember Roger, and definitely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and good luck with all that work that's still to be done.
Okay,
all the best.
All right.
Take care. Bye, Nicky.
Bye. Bye.